Okay, welcome to the Bucky Weekend Call. This is November 11th, 10th, or November 10th or November 9th, depending on what continent you're on. We're discussing a fuller explanation. We're on page 33, and we're going to stop at start at the first full paragraph at the top of page 33, and get more on the topic of systems and synergy. Joe, how are you feeling, and what do you anticipate to get from today's meeting?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's good to see everybody. It's good to be here. I'm really looking forward to kind of going through this and kind of thinking about how, thinking synergetically. I think that that's actually become increasingly important now that we're moving forward in the sense that we're trying to figure out how things relate to one another. And that it's understanding how different domains relate to one another. And I think understanding things like synergy, this is where AI is really going to make a difference. I think this is one of the key areas. I was listening to a show that everyone here may have heard of quite a while ago, before I was born, actually, called Connections. And so the connections between events, it was mostly relating. And so I think that but the connections in between domains and how to think synergetically, how to look at things synergetically, that's what Bucky did best. And so I think that this is an important area to really kind of to get our minds around, because I think it's synergetic type of thinking that AI will augment. And I think some of the more specialized domain thinking AI will do away with. So, that this is an important chapter or important part of Bucky's thinking, not just the chapter, it's the book, really. So, John, how do you feel? And what do you want to take away from today?
I'm very glad to be back here today, and I've really enjoyed our discussion before we formally started today's call and our review of the state of the world, which is a little scary. Had some paradigm shifts in my thinking this week, and it made me aware of how attached we can be to a belief that's not necessarily a fact, and how reluctant human beings tend to be to. And I think that's one of the things Bucky did. He said, "I'd rather be not understood than misunderstood." He spent 2 years in silence, analysing his thoughts. If there is to be any improvement in the world, I think we have to be prepared to think differently, to open ourselves to new paradigms. And I just was reminded during the week, with the events of the week, of a lot of the things that Bucky wrote in his last book 41, 42 years ago. Nothing new, but I'm just keen to look at it with an open mind, to open my mind as far as I can, and to review what Bucky wrote and said. In the last 2 weeks, a good friend of mine who was a great Bucky fan, Dominic Leone, who was a Money New instructor and a business school for entrepreneurs instructor, passed away about 2 weeks ago. And another friend of mine had a major stroke. So it's in the last 2 weeks. I'm reminded regularly of how fragile life is and how we have no guarantees. So I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be part of this call, and hopefully going to walk away with some new thoughts. So, Steve, how do you feel, and what do you hope to take out of today?
I'm really excited about being here today. I'm glad you guys are here, and lovely to hear you share. I too enjoyed the conversation at the beginning of this call. While we're having our conversation about Bucky, the world is churning, and we're going to see. We're just going to see what happens with it all. This particular section we're reading is on systems. A system is a conceivable entity dividing universe into two parts, the inside and the outside of the system. I've never, I mean, nobody taught me about systems in school. We learned about dogs and cats and horses. We learned about cowboys, and very rarely did we understand each of those happenings as part of a system. And as soon as I see something in a system, it completely changes my paradigm about the thing. I mean, I can look at dogs. I say, okay, what is a dog? But when I see how dogs relate to the human partners and how dogs have been critical for human development over thousands of years, suddenly my picture about dogs change a little bit. You know, they're not just pets, and I shouldn't, and it's not just that I shouldn't eat my pet. I shouldn't name an animal and then try to eat it. You know, there's something else about that animal that's critical. And of course, the whole universe is a giant system, and every part is critical to it. So I really enjoy this whole approach that we're doing, and I'm excited to continue. We're going to start on page 33, at the top of page 33, and let's see. I don't think I can make that border shrink because it's in a browser. It's in a format, but that's where we start. Is would be right here, and I really like us to trade off reading and give everybody a chance to stay awake and participate. So, who would care to read starting out?
I'm happy to.
All right, really cool. Hang on, I just covered up your top line. There we go.
Okay. What else must be true? Let's look at the connections between the four corners. Between 2 points, there is only one link. Add a third for a total of 3 links, inevitably forming a triangle. See if you can make something else. Now bring in a 4th point and count the number of interconnections by joining A to B, B to C, C to D, D to A to C, and finally B to D. We exhaust all the possibilities with 6 connections or edges in geometrical terminology. Edges join vertices, and together they generate windows called faces.
Now, this has been a superhuman. This whole conversation has been big to me. Normally, the way we would do this, we'd see this line here, the vertical line between A and C, it's broken. But the way I would have done it in school is I would have connected it. So this would have been a square or a diamond, and it would have had a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, and it would have been a square. But by this looping over here, because this horizontal axis does not touch this vertical axis, it switches it into a tetrahedron. That's the one little magic thing. We go from diamonds and squares and 4 triangles in a square to a tetrahedron with 4 faces. Boggles my mind. That simple prospect right there of those two not intersecting blows me away. I just had to talk about it. I saw that 3 weeks ago when I saw this thing. And that's just an amazing, subtle difference that Bucky makes a big deal out of. So anyway, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thanks for letting me bother all over it. Okay, if you want to continue.
This minimum system was given the name tetrahedron, 4 sides, by the Greeks after the 4 triangular faces created by the set of 4 vertices and their 6 edges. Fuller deplored the Greek nomenclature, which refers exclusively to the number of faces, the very elements that don't exist. There are no solids, no continuous surfaces, only energy event complexes and relationships. However, he did not fully develop a satisfactory alternative, so we shall have to work with the time-honoured convention. What we lose in accurate description of physical reality, we gain in clarity and consistency. The tetrahedron shows up frequently in this exploration. This and other recurring patterns seem coincidental or magical at first, but soon come to be anticipated. endless demonstrations of the order inherent in space. The process is typical of synergetics. We stumble into the tetrahedron by asking the most elementary questions. What is the simplest way to enclose space? And later, everywhere we look, there it is again, an inescapable consequence of a spectrum of geometric procedures. The straightforward logic of our first encounter with the tetrahedron drives us to wonder if it displays any other unique properties. It turns out to be a reliable sort of minimum module or quantum, as Fuller points out, in myriad ways. Not the least impressive involves counting the edges of all regular, semi-regular, and triangulated geodesic polyhedra, from the simple cube to the more complex rhombic dodecahedron, to the vast array of geodesics. The resulting numbers are all multiples of the tetrahedron 6. We can therefore take apart any polyhedral system in these categories and reassemble the edges into some number of complete tetrahedra. Even though we are not yet familiar with these other polyhedra, the observation stands as a representative example of the surprising whole number relationships which make our investigation increasingly alluring. Do you want to pause or keep going?
Does somebody want to comment so far? Thank you for pausing, John. Gives us a chance to editorialize.
Sorry, I was I was muted there for a moment. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is actually, obviously fundamental to Bucky's thinking. The first aspect of this is obviously the starting with the beginning and these simple questions, which is actually allows him to question conventional wisdom. And so that fundamental is to say, why are we thinking about this? In a very from a narrow point of view. One of the things that I think that I really liked was when Amy mentioned the trade-offs, in the sense that what we gain is clarity and consistency. And I think that that's something that is kind of it's important to kind of really understand, is I think that when we're thinking about things synergetically, consistency is something that is making connections between multiple domains, as I was saying a little bit earlier, because you're seeing the patterns and things. And so for me, kind of thinking about things as energy events, looking at the events themselves, and the relationships between those events, allows you to develop a consistent pattern of behavior, of how parts interact with one another. And as you can see that, then you can start thinking about how to critique the system, and what changes are possible, or that are wise to make. So, in a sense that I think this has a really big implication when it comes to economics in particular. So, what is it that, what is fundamental when you're looking at the consistent patterns between our interactions? And that's a question we can go on for probably 3 hours about, like, within 2 minutes. Like, so what is fundamental to to the way we interact? When I say interact, I am thinking about it in a very narrow way, in the sense that the transactional aspect of it. But that is something that is to be considered.
And Joe, you're saying this exactly. You're talking about, I can say no event occurs in isolation. That's what you're basically saying. There is nothing that occurs in isolation. And most human beings look at a thing as though it's isolated, like Trump, for example.
Yeah, right, right.
No event occurs in isolation. Anyway,
Well,
you know,
he does
so
occur he does occur in, I mean, but his impact isn't in isolation, but
that's
yeah,
actually right. Cool.
it's, but it's, and just to really quickly, and I put Russ Ackoff's definition of a system in the chat, just, for, just so that
Do you want to read it?
it's a,
Because Russ
yeah,
Ackoff, he's amazing. Russell
he
Ackoff.
is. I really do. I think that, he's a fantastic systems thinker. He was at University of Pennsylvania, same time Bucky was. And so his definition of a system is defined as a whole that contains two or more parts, each capable of influencing the whole properties or behavior. The parts of a system do not operate independently. Their effects on the whole are interdependent, influenced by the actions of other parts. I mean, that's essentially what Bucky's saying with events.
Yeah.
This interconnectedness means that no subgroup of parts can independently affect the whole either.
Yeah.
So I think that, kind of this is just, talking about the importance of really understanding the relationships that, if it contains two or more parts, each capable of, impacting the whole, well, then you really need to know how those parts interact. So, and I think that Russ Ackoff's ideas around specialization, education. I mean, I can put a video in the chat that, I mean, it's 45 minutes, but it is, it's probably, I rarely say that because, but it is some of the best, one of the best uses of your time that you could probably spend. Because I think that he gives some interesting case studies in there about education in particular. But even about how an automobile works, that I think are really highlight what it means to be a systems thinker.
And his discussion, you sent me that thing a couple years ago, and the way he talked about an automobile and the
Yeah,
way you can take the wheels apart and you don't have an automobile, and you can put all the parts back together and you still don't have an automobile. The parts have to relate to each other in a specific way to create that automobile.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm sorry, Steve.
No, that's cool. I love it. Finish it off.
I just want to, basically say, I think that that's one of the most important examples. He says you can take the best parts of every automobile, the best part of a Rolls Royce, the best part of Mercedes, the best part of everything, and put them all together, and you're not even going to have a car.
Yeah, nothing
And
works.
it's because the way that's how the parts interact with one another. It's not necessarily having just the best part. So, in order to have a functioning system. So that's that's one of those clear ideas. And what I think it also speaks to, and I've used this example, is this idea, um, if you don't understand the fundamentals, the essence of what, a carburetor is, a door, or what it's all trying to do, right? And you're not able to simplify it to its most simple components, which is what Fuller's doing. He literally actually just said that, or Amy said that. If you're not able to do that, you become overly special, you become too specialized. And just like a part can be too specialized to a particular car, and become meaningless in another instance, that if you don't understand what it is, what a door does, what a wheel does, what a car, what a carburetor does, what an engine is, the components within an engine, well, you're relegated to that domain, right? You're so specialized, you only focus on one car, one type of car, actually, on top of that, not one car, So I think that what that highlights is like this ability, this over specialization, when you don't even really understand the essence of what it is that the component is actually doing. And I think it's a metaphor, but it works. I think it works really well. So
Very cool. I love that. If that's the video you showed me 3 or 4 years ago, I listened to
is.
that thing 18 times, man. That is so cool.
It
Um,
is. It is. It's good.
and I want to bring up part of that quote is two or more parts, each capable of influencing the whole's properties or behavior. In other words, every part affects every part.
Right.
And of course, that's what Bucky's principle is about with his idea of nodes and vectors.
Right.
And Stephen Wolfram right now is developing this whole theory of universe. And he speaks of a hypergraph, which is a four-dimensional graph where every point on the graph relates to every other part, to every other point on the graph. And he gives an excellent talk, you guys. I put that link down here. He summarizes his latest stuff here. And he is really solving, his formulas, simple formulas, can create black holes and create space. And the space is the nodes. And what's happening is the interrelationships of all those nodes, which are interrelating with each other. So I'm going to change that because I think that I can make that one part a little bit more clear. With every point of the graph relates to every other point in the graph. So I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to delete this guy up here. Okay, good. So I don't know how that's going to affect the thing, but there we go. Good point. I highly recommend the Ackoff link. And if you guys get a chance to do the Stephen Wolfram link, that would be cool. Okay, continuing. I think, did you leave off with alluring, John?
Yes.
You know, live off of what?
Alluring, so increasingly alluring. The investigation increasingly alluring. So
we're starting.
I can give it.
Okay.
I can give it.
Okay, go for it.
Conceptual and real systems. Notice that these geometrical systems are purely conceptual. So far, they exist only in our mind as sets of relationships. They can be lent substance by any number of materials. As for example, the toothpicks and marshmallows mentioned above. However, the essence of a system is independent of the choice of materials. 6 sticks will create a tetrahedron whether we use wood or metal. Similarly, 4 ping pong balls or 4 people constitute a tetrahedral system. The tetrahedron, being a conceptual entity, is sizeless and timeless. Thus, Fuller writes in Synergetics, size is always a special case experience. 515.14. Size belongs to a different category of parameters than vertices, edges, and bases. Those who only relate to actual constructs, such as color, temperature, and duration, does he take this concern with terminology too far? His justification is twofold, encompassing first a deep conviction that words influence the shape of our thinking, and secondly, faith in the power of accurate models in problem solving. For humanity to solve its complex problems, he was convinced that vocabulary and other models had to be absolutely precise. So Fuller's concern that we recognize conceptual systems as sizeless sets of relationships capable of being physically embodied is an essential part of his geometry of thinking. In either form, the emphasis is on the relationships. We begin to see
I just wanted to throw in here, this is all topology. In other words, the dimensions are irrelevant. It's the relationships that make things relevant. This goes back to the classic topological example of a donut and a cup are the same topological structure. And to watch that video, I'll find that and post it on the thing, because that really rates this whole idea of recognized conceptual system as sizeless. and as sets of relationships capable of being physically embodied is an essential part of the geometry of thinking. So he's talking about topology. I just thought I would throw that in.
Yeah, no, I think that this is actually one of those key points as to why I like Bucky is that, he uses different words, meaning he's really thought about the concepts, the underlying concepts behind the words, so that they accurately depict reality. And that leads to what Amy was saying earlier with consistency. It leads to predictability is another way of saying it. And once you have that predictability, you become able to make the connections between systems or domains. So I think that this is like one of those key areas when you're talking about the precision of the words themselves, but also the ability to, kind of, develop a model that's predictable. And I've said this before, one of the things that I feel like artificial intelligence will accelerate is the ability to reconcile concepts and the integrity of words itself. And I'm speaking, just again, I used the example in the past, something like a contract in particular, where there's no ambiguity in the terms that are actually being negotiated. And I think that that's something that is a very practical application of having words that are actually representative of reality, and how that can lead to, well, into integrity, something actually, John, that you started with, the idea of truth. We were talking a little bit about, and so the integrity of words, in particular, have profound, implications, and I think that the ability to reconcile that with geometric concepts, I mean, and essentially the patterns, the mathematical concepts, that's what Bucky does so well.
Cool. And Richard just joined us. How you doing, Richard? You still in Hawaii?
Yeah, it's still here. We've just had a friend's place, well, actually an in-law's place. Gonna be here for a couple hours and then head out for the airport. We leave at midnight.
Oh,
And a direct flight to Calgary.
delighted that you're able to join us. Very cool.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of reading. I hope you can see your thing there. Do you want to read some more?
Sure.
Joe?
Yeah. We begin to see a basis for the phenomena of vastly different properties exhibited by systems with identical constituents. One notable example is the soft gray graphite of pencils, in contrast to sparkling impenetrable diamonds, both consisting exclusively of carbon atoms. Geometry alone accounts for their differences. We shall see how later, but as always, our attention will be on shape and valiancy, numbers of connections, rather than the substance. Let's get back to our starting point. Any subdivision of universe constitutes a system. We have found the simplest example and learn the mathematical terms. Our next step is to look at more complex systems. It does not stretch our definition to discuss very elaborate forms, such as school or even a crocodile. Both have requisite boundary. For that matter, our entire planet is a system, unimaginable, intricate, but still finite. This line of thought, together with our geometry lesson, suggests an approach to problem solving, a whole systems view that demands consideration of the influence of even every move on its entire system. Such an approach, which prohibits short-term or piecemeal solutions to long-term problems, may sound simplistic or vague at first. However, the method is based on the assumption of rigorous analytical procedures. In synergetics, Fuller introduces the concept with a deliberately simple example, which provides an analogy for more complex situations. A fictitious child draws on the ground with a stick, announcing that he has made a triangle. Then Bucky himself intervenes to point out to the child that he has created 4 triangles, not just one. Because operational mathematics requires that a triangle must be inscribed on something in order to exist, whether on a piece of paper or on the surface of the earth, that something is always a system with an inside and an outside. Unwittingly, the child has divided the.
Well, I'm still contemplating that example. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to finish this.
All right.
Earth's surface into 2 areas. Both regions are bounded by 3 arcs, and therefore both quality of spherical triangles. Despite the fact that one is small and tangible and the other covers most of the Earth's surface, we are not used to thinking in these terms, philosophizes Bullock, but we must begin to really think about what we're doing.
Okay, so my question comes back to a fictitious child draws on the ground with a stick, announcing he's made a triangle. Then Bucky himself intervenes to point out that the child has created 4 triangles, not just one, because operational mathematics requires a triangle must be inscribed on something in order to exist. So how am I to picture those 4 triangles?
How are you to picture those 4 triangles?
So
I mean, there's the faces, but then you have it's the tetrahedron, right?
Oh, is that what it is?
That's
That
the way I'm
must be
looking
what
at
it is. Because the triangle in operational mathematics, the triangle must be inscribed in something in order to exist, and something in order to exist has to have 3 dimensions.
Which means it's being observed too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes it from a triangle to a tetrahedron because it exists in space. And if it were only a triangle, it'd be in a 2-dimensional reality, which is not really operational. Am I getting that right, Richard? Is that what that says? You're on mute, my friend. And maybe you're not in a place where you could talk. I still can't hear you because you're muted. And unfortunately, I can't unmute you. All I can do is ask you to unmute. Okay, Richard, I'm going to give you the count of 3, and then I'm going to make John answer the question. No, I'm not going to do that.
Quick, Richard, quick, unmute.
No, he turned his camera off.
He turned his camera off, so he's trying to find something. That's cool. That must be what it is. It must be that
it is.
Operational mathematics, it has to exist in 4D. So I found a deal here, which this is old news, I'm sure, but I put this link in the chat where it goes through and it shows this this ring here. Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to start back a little bit more. So it shows this ring expanding. So topologically, this pipe is the same as this ring because the dimensions are irrelevant. Basically it's a substance with a hole in the middle. So now it takes the donut and morphs the donut into a cup and morphs the cup into a donut.
Yeah.
And that's topologically what's going on. And then talks about different ways to mold a donut. As long as it holds that that hole in the middle of it, it is a donut. So, and this kind of explains what's going on in terms of different geometry of shape and everything, and the idea of what topology. In topology, these are all a circle, a square, a triangle are all the same thing. It's because the dimensions don't make any difference. Topology is rubber sheet thing. Anyway, this is kind of cool, and it goes into polyhedra and reshapes polyhedra and talks about it. So anyway, I put that link in the chat because they're talking about topology here, and maybe Richard now can find his microphone. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I did. I finally found, I don't know why it wasn't unmuting, but yeah, in that section, I guess there was two words or two phrases that struck me. One is the word system, and the other is the two words whole system. And so when in that pattern of drawing a triangle on the surface, that to me, as Joel read, is a system in the sense that there's the inside and outside and the dividing itself. But it's not a whole system. And this is where I've often had trouble with the language of systems and whole systems. So a system, in my mind, is what she described in terms of drawing the triangle on the surface or on a piece of paper. A whole system then gets us into the issue of a minimum whole and whatever might be a holistic representation beyond the minimum. And that's where Fuller comes in and says the minimum has to be 4. And so that triangle, in order to be a minimum whole system, has to not only have inside and outside, but it also has to be able to be freestanding. And that's when it can't freestand until it is turned into a tetrahedron, which then becomes a minimum whole system. And the way you turn that triangle into a minimum whole system is you divide at the midpoints and connect them. So now you've got 4 triangles on the surface of the Earth. And and if you could, on a piece of paper, you could do this, you could then cut those out and then fold the 3 of those triangles up into like a flower folding up into an upright, and you end up then having three sort of upright triangles and one on the bottom, which is 4.
Right on.
And so I think what happens, I know I do this, is that I'm not clear when I'm talking just about a system, which could be that minimum or that simple that has just been described, and when I'm talking about a whole system, and when I'm talking about a minimum whole system or a far more complex whole system, which of course has way more than 4.
Cool. Any other comments or questions? All righty. Richard, are you in a place where you can read?
No, I can't. It has to be increased a bit more because I'm just working on my phone. Or just a minute.
Well, hang on. I think I can do that for you.
Yeah, I can do it now. I can.
Okay, good. And let me think here. I need to get over here, and then I can do it like that. Does that help?
Yeah, now it's too big.
Oh, now it's too big. Okay, good. How's that? I think we finished down to down to this paragraph.
Go back to where you had originally. I think I can now see it.
Okay, good. Oh, where I had it originally? Where I had it originally was kind
Yeah,
of like,
you're out there.
you know, about here. I don't mind being a little bit bigger. Did you read the part about spherical triangles, Joe? I guess you must have.
Yeah, I mean, I read all the way up to hold on.
Yeah. Is that going to be readable for you, Richard?
Well, now I'm just getting a screen that says, "Oh, baby, baby."
You are. I don't know how that's happening. Buckminster Fuller. I'll stop sharing and try it again. My system is showing me that I'm sharing the book. Is that now present to you?
Yeah, there we are.
All right, good. So we're starting here at hold on.
Okay, hold on, says the child. That's only 2 triangles. Why did you say there were 4? Well, Bucky continues, concave and convex are not the same. When you delineated 2 concave triangles on the outside surface, you also created 2 convex spherical triangles, one very small and the other very large on the inside. But I didn't mean to make 4 triangles, protests bewildered child. That doesn't matter, his teacher replies. You still are responsible for them.
Now I'm totally confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
His story can be considered a parable. Its purpose is as much to encourage a sort of holistic morality as to make a mathematical statement. The message turned tunnel vision is obsolete. As human beings, we cannot afford to ignore the effect of our actions on the rest of a system while working on an isolated part. Rather, we must become responsible for whole systems. We didn't mean to make 4 triangles or indeed to make the big mess of pollution, but we did. As playful as this example seems, it calls our attention to what Fuller perceives as a dangerous bias on one side of the line, inherent in traditional mathematics. He points out that our grade school geometry lessons involve concept defined as bounded by certain lines. A triangle is an area bounded by 3 lines, for example, thus excusing us from paying attention to its environment. Once a figure is delineated, we no longer have to consider the rest of the system. This narrow approach, Fuller argues, instills in us at an impressionable age a deep bias toward our side of the line. We see and feel an unshakable correctness about our side's way of carrying on. On the other hand, it forces us to remain aware of all sides. In Fuller's opinion, being taught in the first place that all 4 triangles are equally valid needs to move.
Sorry, I was thinking about Anne. I was wishing Anne were here. Go ahead.
Oneness is impossible to explain. And this, it goes in with an awareness itself without which there can be no life implies the existence of otherness. Ergo, unity is plural and a minimum 2.
Well, I hope that that Anne gets this part of the conversation. I wonder if she's actually been dealing with this at this level, because it's so profound to me that a triangle can't even exist on a piece of paper without having the piece of paper there as a context in which it can exist. I mean, because I've always seen the triangle as the universe, right? Everything inside those 3 lines counts and everything outside those 3 lines doesn't count. And I've never considered that as a minimum of 2.
Well, and this is also the little quiz that I learned from one of Fuller's writings around the triangle, and the quiz that says, again, the teacher says to the child, or you can say to me or me to you, what's the sum of the angles of an equilateral triangle?
Right.
And everybody was taught, so therefore most of us will answer 180.
Right.
And then he'll say, no, you forgot the outside angles. And so
Yeah.
it really is 1,080.
Yeah.
And that to me is so profound in the concept of meanness. You know, my country, my culture, my race, my what, everything is my.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really bothers me in a global sense these days is everybody, whoever they are, wherever they are, will often claim that, you know, my country is the best country in the world.
Yeah.
And right away, that's basically saying that all other countries are diminished in relation to my country.
Yeah.
And and yet here we are, you know, 190 countries in a United Nations sort of network, all claiming to be the best country in the world, or at least my home in my country is the best place. And I wished we could say, yes, you know, for whatever reasons, I really like where I live and my country and so forth, but not to do it in a way in which we inadvertently or directly diminish another country
Yeah.
or another person's view that their country is the best place in the world for them to live.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I'm having an
even
epiphany right now. Any other comments or questions?
no, go ahead. Sir.
Well, I'm just really getting this. I wish that Anne were here to see if she's actually been doing something with this. But here's what I'm seeing. To follow what we just read and what Richard was just saying, was that I have my triangle here. And when I ask how many degrees are in that triangle, I count the 180 inside. I don't count the 900 degrees outside of the triangle. That requires inness and outness. It requires meanness and themness. There is no one. There has to be two.
Right.
And then when in the paragraph above, it said, look, if I draw that triangle on that piece of paper, that's the concave triangle, but there's a convex one also.
Right.
So I have actually two triangles. That this triangle does not exist without the convex, without the other side of the paper. It might be one way to look at it, because it has to be in reality. If there weren't the other side of this paper, that triangle would not exist. The concave triangle and the convex triangle. I wonder if Anne is teaching that in school, and I wonder what my brain would do as a kid. I think my brain would explode. Then I'd go home and I'd do what I could to explain it to my parents. Wow. And
Yeah.
to teach the kids in a way that they could go home and defend that with their parents would be profound.
Yeah.
And I hate to take this on, but another thought hit me. Do you want to say something, Joe?
You can go ahead and finish.
Okay.
No.
But this has hit me a couple times. The book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Have you guys ever heard of this book? Hermann Hesse is a Nobel Prize winning writer, right? And Siddhartha is profound. And Siddhartha, it's actually a takeoff on the guy's name is Siddhartha Gautama. And actually, the Buddha's name was Siddhartha Gautama. And so Buddhists hate that book because it fictionalizes the life of Buddha, not like the Muslims would hate a book about Muhammad, but they don't really like it. But in a critical part of that book, at the end of that book, Govinda, Siddhartha's lifelong friend, meets Siddhartha. It's such a powerful, powerful, powerful book. Siddhartha at this point has become a ferryman and is taking all these. He takes people across this river, and it just so happens that Buddha has prophesied that on the full moon, his 80th birthday, there would be a full moon, and he would die on that evening. And so all of these disciples are they're migrating to go be with the Buddha when the Buddha dies. And Govinda is on this boat crossing this river to get to the Buddha, and his friend Siddhartha, lifelong friends, is the ferryman on the boat. And Govinda doesn't recognize Siddhartha at all, because Siddhartha's weather torn and beaten up, and Govinda's this, priestly guy, and at the end he goes, Govinda, you didn't recognize me. And Govinda goes, what? And at this moment he realizes that it's Siddhartha, his lifelong friend, but he's on her way to go see the Buddha. He bends over in a moment of compassion and kisses Siddhartha's forehead. And when he does, he looks past Siddhartha and sees the river. And upon kissing Siddhartha's forehead, sees the river, the vaporized water going up, it becoming clouds, it raining behind the mountains, turning into the mountain stream coming down in the river. And suddenly he saw water as a system. He didn't see water as just water in the river. He saw water as everywhere all at once. And that was Govinda's moment of enlightenment. And of course, it was my big moment of enlightenment. But now now it's all coming in a new context for me. So I had to share that story. Why do I see a thing in isolation? Why do I not see a thing in a system? Why is it that I do not see that triangle in the context of 1080 degrees? Why is it I do not understand that in order for this to exist, that has to exist? Wow. My brain is blowing out. So anyway, any other comments or thoughts? Thank you very much for explaining that, Richard, because I had epiphany after epiphany as you spoke. So, and you said things we've talked about in this call many a time.
Yeah.
And it's like you kissed me on the forehead, or I was kissing you on the forehead, and suddenly I saw the whole universe blow up in front of my face. Cool. Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
No, I mean, I think that this is actually when we start to just coming back to what we were saying a little bit earlier about the integrity of words. When we're talking about relationships, that the words have to accurately depict reality. So even if we're assessing a system, that the ability to capture the essence of a system, essence of the nodes themselves, in order to capture what the connections are between the nodes. That's where language really comes in. So it's not merely just counting to 4. It's actually understanding what the essence of 4 is. And that's why when Fuller talks about the idea of the simplest system, the most basic model, that it's actually you're capturing the essence of the ideas and concepts of the nodes themselves. Otherwise, you could just be counting to 4.
Cool beans. Any other comments or questions? John, do you feel like continuing some reading?
Yes, I will.
Here we go. Limits of resolution.
Limits of resolution as part of the whole systems approach. Another important aspect of Fuller's systems concept is tune-in ability, which deals with limits of resolution and is best explained by analogy. Fuller's ready example, as implied by the term, would be to remind us of the radio waves of all different amplitude and frequency filling the room wherever you happen to be reading this page. These waves are as much a part of physical reality as the chair you are sitting in, but the specific energy pattern is such that you cannot tune into the programs without help from a radio. Information and energy are scattered chaotically throughout your room, mostly undetected, except for the small fraction, chairs, visible light, and so on, that can be directly perceived by human senses. You can turn on the radio and thereby tune in to one program, one system, temporarily ignoring the rest. Boundaries change all the time as new elements are incorporated into a system or as the focus zooms in to investigate a component in greater detail. New levels of complexity reveal distinct new systems. For example, we might look at the system called your living room and then want to consider its function in the bigger system, your house, or conversely, zoom in to investigate the red overstuffed chair and the details of its carpentry and upholstery. Or further still, one nail might be of interest as a system. We can also go back out to your town, your state, etc. The concept of tune-in ability allows us to treat a set of events or items as a system, despite the involvement of many concurrent factors on other levels. What kinds of things constitute systems? Tetrahedron, crocodile, room, chair, you, thought. Wait, what about thoughts? We recall Fuller's lifelong effort never to use mankind's precious tool of language carelessly. I discipline myself to define every word I use, else I must give it up. In a 1975 videotaped lecture, he explains that he would not allow himself the use of any word for which he did not have a clear, experientially referenced definition. Such an effort requires enormous discipline to avoid automatic associations and thereby enable an objective analysis of each word. It extends to the most basic words and actions, even thinking. Fuller formulates his definition analytically, asking, what is it I am conscious of doing when I say I am thinking? We may not be able to say what it is, but we should be able to specify the procedure. Thinking, he explains, starts with spontaneous preoccupation. The process is never deliberate initially. We then choose to accommodate the trend through conscious dismissal of irrelevancies, which are temporarily held off to the side as they do not seem to belong in the current thought. Fuller places irrelevancies in two categories: experiences too large or too frequent to influence the tuned-in thought, and those too small and too frequent to play a part. The process he describes is similar to tuning a radio, with its progressive dismissal of irrelevant, other frequency events, ultimately leaving only the few experiences which are lucidly relevant and thus interconnected by their relationship. Thinking,
Go
okay.
ahead. Well, I was just going to say, this is one of my favorite things to talk about is the circles of irrelevancies. And I've really thought immensely about this and don't see them in 2 dimensions. I see them actually in 4 dimensions. Continue, please.
Yeah.
Thinking isolates, sorry, Joe.
No. I'm sorry.
Thinking isolates events. Understanding then interconnects them. Understanding is structure, Fuller declares, for it means establishing the relationships between events. A thought is then a relevant set or a considerable set, experiences related to each other in some way. All the rest of experience is outside the set, not tuned in. A thought, therefore, defines an insideness and an outsideness. It is a conceptual subdivision of universe. I'll call it a system, declares Bucky. I now have a geometric description of a thought.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
I just have to say it, and I'm only saying it because Steve, we've talked about it in the past. Even thinking about this, and I know that this is a bit of a in a religious context, but the idea in the beginning was the word. It comes to mind for me. I mean, that's essentially what is coming to mind. Because think about the world without form or void. When you speak, it has a form, right? Your thought becomes part of the form. And then so your minds, you're externally, you're taking what's internal and making it external, All right, so it's then being able to be received. So I think that this is where understanding the integrity of the words and how they accurately depict reality comes into or relates directly to our ability to shape reality, to shape objects in the world. And I think and that's one of the core ideas what Fuller is getting to in these paragraphs, I think. And so it's our thoughts, and then how do we externalize those thoughts? And how do they relate to how we perceive the world itself? Even if we're isolating events, as he had said, our ability to describe those events accurately is exactly what makes us or gives us the ability to predict future events, because you can see the pattern within the things, within the events themselves. But it's based off of, the idea of things being articulated clearly.
Wow. Are there any other comments on this before I go crazy for a minute? And I wish I could find this. I'm looking really quickly, but I've just got to share this. There's a thing I studied back in the 80s called medical hypnoanalysis. And it just actually, I just put a link in the thing called Memory as a Self-Adapting Agent. This guy is now doing neuroscience, and he is showing that thoughts are agents and that thoughts occur in a human brain. And actually, unless a person uses volition, the thought repopulates itself because the brain wants to ruminate. And that in that case, thoughts are actual agents. In medical hypnoanalysis, it talks about this as infants, we're sitting here in a state of bliss, and our arms are waving around us and our legs are waving around us, and we really don't know who we are or what's going on. And then we have an event, a sensorial event. And that sensorial event, the first one is called the initial sensitizing event. And when suddenly the person becomes aware that something is going on. And usually at that initial sensitizing, the person makes a decision that is good or bad. And either if it's good, they seek the feeling, or if it's bad, they avoid it. If it didn't occur on the initial sensitizing event, the initial sensitizing event just maybe, what was that? And then another event occurs and the brain goes, I feel just like when that occurred. And then at some point it decides to seek or avoid. But now you have the symptom producing event, because now I'm actively seeking or avoiding. I'm either brushing the fit off or I'm doing something to get away from it. And then when suddenly I create a symptom or a behavior that's effective in terms of fulfilling my goal to seek the sensation more, like if my mother's breast comes to me, I don't turn away. I learn to turn into that breast, because if I turn away, I don't get it. I'm seeking that breast, so I look for it, and then I finally find it. Pretty soon it's habitual. As soon as I feel something soft in my face, man, I'm right there. We now have a symptom intensifying event, and this is all how belief systems are created. Now, those belief systems do not exist in isolation. They are actually cumulative systems, like little onions or solar systems that relate to each other. I can't find my initial 4 stages of belief systems, but what I was able to find is this. This shows different belief systems interrelating with each other. And I studied this back in 1982, and with this whole idea of medical hypnoanalysis, because none of these belief systems exist out of context. They're always put in a context. The brain says, oh, well, this goes with this and that goes with that. And so this is what creates neurosis. Because let's say that I'm working here to resolve the issue I have with my behavior relative to belief system number 1. All these circles around here represents the initial sensitizing event, the symptom producing event, the symptom intensifying event. In other words, all these are experiences like straws on a camel's back. And let's say I want to resolve this issue. Let's say that I've learned that if a fly lands on my arm, I punch my brother and the fly goes away. Well, yeah, I'm moving my arm so the fly goes away, but punching my brother is inappropriate, right? So I'm now a psychiatrist and I'm looking to resolve this issue. And I want to say now, why do you punch your brother every time a fly lands on your arm? Well, I get down here like this and I start coming in and I get intercepted by this system, which like orbits around, and that is probably system either 8 or 9. And the thing is, well, before I can get to the fact there's a fly in my arm, my brother is a jerk and deserves to be punched, right? And so these belief systems interact in such a way to create a geometry that most people aren't even conscious of. All these beliefs relate to other beliefs, which is basically what Bucky is saying right here. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. If I can find my chart on how these systems are formed, I will throw it out here. But I thought, thank you for letting me share, you guys.
No, I mean, that was fantastic. I very much appreciated your share.
Cool. So
Actually, if you drop that in the chat, I'd appreciate that.
I'll do that. I'll drop in the chat. I'm going to look for the other one. I'll drop both of them in when I find it. And in my excitement, I forgot where we were here. So where are we on this page? John, were you reading?
Hang on a second.
Okay.
I can't remember whether it was a thought is then, or this is the conclusion that initially led.
I think this is the conclusion, if I remember
Because I was
correctly.
looking at both, so yeah.
Okay, good. If you want to continue, you can. If you want to pass it off to somebody else, that's great.
I'm happy to pick it up.
Okay.
This is the conclusion that initially led Fuller to wonder how many events were necessary to create insideness and outsideness. Realizing that a thought required at least enough somethings to define an isolated system, it seemed vitally important to know the minimum number, the terminal condition. He thereby arrived at the tetrahedron. This gave me great power of definition, he recalls, both in terms of understanding more about thinking and by isolating the theoretical minimum case with its 4 events and 6 relationships. One example of the development of a thought, by no means a minimal thought, could be found in what to cook for dinner. Walking to the grocery store, you notice that the leaves of the maple trees are turning autumn red, but you consciously push that observation off to the side to be considered later, as it does not relate to the pressing issue of dinner. You begin to pull in the various relevant items, the food that you already have at home that could become a part of this meal, what you had for dinner last night, special items that might be featured by the grocery store, favourite foods, how they look, ideas about nutrition, certain foods that go well together, and so on. Out of this jumble of related events, a structure starts to take form. After a while, dinner is planned and your mind is set free to attend to some of the other thoughts waiting quietly in the side shadows. This kind of digression is typical of Fuller's discourse, both written and oral. Such juxtapositions of geometry and philosophy are quite deliberate, for synergetics strives to identify structural similarities among phenomena, both physical and metaphysical. Fuller encourages us to seek these patterns, which we often miss because of the narrow focus of our attention. To conclude, geometry.
I hit the wrong button of our attention. Here we go. Are we in synergy here? I can look up to conclude.
No, I don't think we're here yet. I think.
Yeah.
To conclude was the beginning of the paragraph.
Right. Was the very beginning of the paragraph.
With a capital T. To conclude.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, but with a capital T.
Right.
It was the beginning of the paragraph.
Wow. There it is.
Yes. To conclude, geometry is the science of systems, which are themselves defined by relationships. Geometry is therefore the study of relationships. This makes it sound relevant to quite a lot. A system is necessarily polyhedral. As a finite aggregate of interrelated events, it has all the qualifications. Relationships can be polyhedrally diagrammed in an effort to understand the behavior of a given whole system. Along these same lines, Fuller has described synergetics as the exploratory strategy of starting with the whole and the known behavior of some of its parts, and the progressive discovery of the integral unknowns, along with the progressive comprehension of the hierarchy of generalized principles. This mouthful can readily be identified as Fuller's elaboration of Eddington's definition of science as a systematic attempt to set in order the facts of experience. Thinking
Well,
into
I'm sorry. This Amy does an excellent job of explaining
Yeah,
the book.
you know,
Yeah.
you have no idea what I've been thinking this whole time is like, you know, I'm sorry, you just beat me to it because and I'm not just gushing here. It's just
Yeah.
it's just really that good actually.
Yeah.
What she's capturing is and it's just deeply profound.
Yeah.
And I mean it seems to some degree. I mean, you know, you can't ignore the fact that saying something simply and being able to communicate it to a lot of people is very powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's one. Well, this idea of how geometry, thinking, thoughts, words, and even how that relates to integrity, to what you were talking about initially, John, and the relationships between synergies and systems and all of this, how it all comes together. You know, looking at things as happenings is one thing, you know, one way of actually looking at language, right? So once this is, you know, one of the things that that's profound by what is being said is the sense that you have an event, it's a happening, you articulate the event and the way the word may have been used to explain that event at that particular moment in time changes. Right. So, but what Bucky's saying here is that if it's aligned to geometrical thinking, if it's aligned to geometry and nature, and if it's accurate, that those happenings are captured with integrity. And one of the things that is often highly problematic with even just the written word in general is that the written word cannot be interrogated normally by the individual who's written it. So an example is you know, somebody like I don't know, Nietzsche, when he writes something, and you know, the Nazis use it for propaganda, and you know that word can't be defended. But when it's aligned, when it's unambiguous, when it's aligned to exactly what the meaning is, and it has a pattern of nature, and it's aligned to geometry, and there's an integrity in the words themselves, then they can't be misinterpreted. So in a way, what he's doing, or what she's doing, when she was even saying this earlier with this idea of timeless, what is timeless is she's capturing the importance of kind of having words that that withstand the test of time. And that's having concepts that are accurately captured. And I think that that's essential when we're talking about, even again, as I said a little bit earlier, with even things like AI. But what she's capturing are all these ideas, including the internal thoughts that we have and how that relates.
Right.
I mean, that's really hard to write. I mean, it really is.
Cool. It's getting
Was that
close.
clear?
I think so. Everybody clear on what Joe's saying? Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, because it's just the
I-
integrity of the words themselves. That's all.
Yeah,
And
I
how it relates to geometric structures.
this is we're now approaching the bottom of page 39, and we started a little bit late. If everybody's willing to do it, if we read about 2 1/5 more pages, we finish the chapter. Is everybody willing to go just a little bit late and finish this chapter, or is it
Yeah,
time
I
to
am.
call it off? Can everybody go, John?
I'm fairly tight for time. I'll need to get away as soon as possible after 1 o'clock my time.
Okay, so that's in about 16
15
minutes.
minutes.
Let's see how far we
16
can
minutes.
get, and maybe we'll have you do your takeaway. And if the rest of us want to hang around, we'll just finish the chapter.
Sure.
All right, really good. So continuing to read. Do you want to finish this page, John?
Yes, I'll finish the page. Thanks. Thinking in terms of systems is a crucial part of Fuller's mathematics. The isolation of systems enables the description of local processes and relationships without reference to an absolute origin, an indispensable tool in a scenario universe. And finally, we pay particular attention to how Fuller's geometry emerges, its principles developing from the basis of the process of thinking. Hence the title of Fuller's opus, Synergetics, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking.
Wonderful. Okay. Joe, do you want to read? Let's read
Sure.
for another
Synergy,
5 or 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, implicit in the above discussion of systems is a properly described accurately by only one word, synergy. Has come into fairly widespread use recently, perhaps due to Bucky's many years of championing its cause, or perhaps just because we finally needed it badly enough. Formerly unknown except to biologists and chemists, this word describes the extraordinarily important property that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. In Fuller's words, synergy means the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. Consider the phenomenon of gravity, the most thorough examination of any object, from pebbles to planets, by itself will not predict the surprising behavior of the attractive force between two objects in direct proportion to the product of their masses and changing inversely with the square of the distance between them. Another dramatic explanation is the combination of an explosive metal and a poisonous gas to produce a harmless white powder that we sprinkle on our food, sodium chloride, or table salt. Bucky's favorite illustration was the behavior of alloys. Synergy alone explains metals increasing their strength. 109.01. He enthusiastically describes the properties of chrome, nickel, steel, whose extraordinary strength have, at high temperatures, enabled the development of the jet engine. Its primary constituents, iron, chromium, and nickel, have tensile strengths of 60,000, 70,000, and 80,000 pounds per square inch, respectively, and combine to create an alloy with 350,000 psi tensile strength.
Wow.
Not only does the chain far exceed the strength of its weakest link, but counterintuitively, it even outperforms the sum of its components' tensile capabilities. Thus, the chain analogy falls through, calling for a new methodology which will incorporate interaugmentation.
Wow, very cool.
A flood of examples of synergy is so rapidly available that one might wonder how we got along without the word. Bucky wondered and concluded that humanity must be out of touch with the environment. Synergy is certainly how nature works, though we pay little direct attention to the phenomenon. We are still familiar with it. Few are surpassed by complex systems arising out of the interaction of simpler parts. Fuller took it a step further. He saw the age-old forms of geometry as models of synergy, comprehensible only in terms of relationships. His eye drawn to their vector edges. He simply did not perceive the solid polyhedra of Plato, self-exiled from the formal mathematical community which would have told him otherwise. Fuller saw the static constructs of geometry as ready and waiting to elucidate the dynamic events of physical universe. Determined to model the new invisible energetic reality, Fuller began to refer to his accumulating findings as energetic geometry. As the search for nature's coordinate system progressed and the recurring theme of synergy became more and more prevalent, the term evolved to synergetic energetic geometry, and finally to synergetics. Fuller's vocabulary tended to develop organically in response to his changing needs for emphasis. He felt a great responsibility to get it just right. In the 30s, enchanted by certain properties of the cube octahedron, Fuller replaced the Greek name with his own trademark word, dimaxion, less from egotism than from frustration being unable to invent exactly the right name, one with enough impact. Later, he found the perfect term to express its unique property and eagerly renamed the indispensable shape vector equilibrium. The name remained unaltered. When Fuller found this truth, he never wavered. The term synergetics then was a response to the single most important characteristic of energetic reality. As discussed in Chapter 1, Fuller overriding goal was to collect the generalized principles. The law of synergy, although too all-encompassing to seem a valid starting point for such an inventory, dictates a basic strategy of starting with a whole system and then investigating its parts. The most painstaking study of its separate components will never reveal the behavior of a system. All other generalized principles, therefore, must be subsets of this fundamental truth. The whole is not equal to the sum of its isolated parts. Now we take some time out to look at aspects of conventional geometry that will illuminate Fuller's work, despite the fact that it is not directly included in synergetics.
And we finished the chapter.
Well done.
Any comments or questions before we have John give his takeaway? Because I have some stuff for my takeaway. John, if you're under some time pressure, we have about 8
Yeah, I
minutes
would like
or
to hear
so.
what John has to say.
How you feeling, John, and what are your takeaways tonight? Delighted to have you here. Good.
Yeah, I was very happy to be here. Glad to reconnect. Richard, I'm glad you managed to join us. And of course, the moment the fourth person arrived, the whole geometry changed. We needed the
Right.
fourth to go from a flat triangle to a triangular prism.
Very
Always
cool.
good to be reminded of Fuller's geometry, even though it hurts my head at times. Good to be. I understand a little bit about systems and a little bit about geometry. As Bucky increases the density, so does the pain in my head. But great to share with you all today. Richard, you missed our summary and review of US politics. That didn't get recorded either.
I don't know if you missed it, but
I just questioned whether the US was still intact. But then again, I'm shifting my view. I may see something very different in weeks to come. Now, great to be here. I don't know. I think I may be able to be here next Sunday as well. I've got my brother visiting from interstate for most of this week coming, which will be good to catch up with him. But yeah, look, there's always much to be learned and existing thoughts to be analysed and perhaps discarded if they're no longer accurate or relevant. So I feel a bit shaken up. My head's a bit in turmoil, but I'm glad to have participated in it. So I will leave you all at that point, and hopefully see you all next week.
Well, John, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Cool,
John.
John. All right,
Thanks.
take care of yourself.
Richard, how are you feeling and what are your takeaways?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. Both a good feeling in having 2 weeks here, and not so good in the sense that flying back tonight and apparently into snow and other kinds of cool conditions.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've been into these kinds of discussions more and more recently. One is with a student that I'm mentoring in an academic program that she's in, and we're constantly talking about systems and the interconnections. And right now, I'm trying to introduce her to why I introduced the belief system or the validator system into the three that I was familiar with for a long time, and that is the individual, if you want, whether it's in a sort of a individual state, or it could be a couple state or a family state, could even be community, and those that are close to them, and those that are there to serve them in the sense of institutional structures. And it was when I factored in the belief system and saw it connect to the other three, then I saw what we were reading about in terms of, well, what you were presenting about the mixture of many belief systems and how they act together and separately to govern the way the whole system operates. And if they're compatible, then the system operates smoothly. If they're not, then you get into all kinds of divisiveness, and you get into the triangulation of my system is better than your system, or my country, or my politics, or whatever it might be. And we try and isolate everything into the claim that I've got the right answer. So yes, there are lots of lessons that came out of last Tuesday, none of which I'm very interested in sort of digesting at the moment. So we'll see how the in David Boehm's sort of context, how the whole thing unfolds over the next several weeks and months and years. So, Joe, how are you feeling? What's your takeaway?
Feeling very good. I appreciate actually going through a lot of this. I think that there's quite a bit of what, as I had said a little bit earlier, as to what Amy's been able to capture, and how clearly she's been able to articulate Fuller's thoughts. And I know that I've said that in the past, but this is like, that's something that I often do, is just kind of sit down and think about, okay, if you just gave me the concepts, the major concepts that were conveyed in the past few pages, how would I write it? And she puts it into simple form and makes it really accessible. And there were a lot of concepts that were put out there. So I mean, I'm appreciative of it in the sense that to be able to clearly see how she's even able to put philosophical approaches, like thoughts and ideas and words, and how she so easily was able to relate that to geometric structures. And I think that that type of approach is, as I mentioned in the past, really going to be essential to any kind of formal progress. Because I think that a lot of times there's a lot of miscommunication that goes on. There's a lack of integrity in our words, and sometimes words are used in a way that they no longer have any meaning. Fuller's dedication to accurately capturing concepts, I think, is one of the ideas, not the only one, certainly, that is finally being able to be realized, how important that is. I think people have known, but I mean, when I say realize, there's the technology to actually recognize its capabilities. And it really is I don't know, it's a pleasure to read. So for me, my major takeaway for today is just some of the understandings of the words, the geometric structures, the ideas, the thoughts, but also the integrity of the words, and how to capture the essence of nodes themselves, and the relationships between those nodes. I think the example that we used a little bit earlier with Russ Ackoff was a really good one. You can take the best parts of a car, but if they don't necessarily relate to one another, then you don't even have a car. In other words, that you can take the best part of a Rolls Royce, Mercedes, and all that, but if you put them together, they don't necessarily work. They have to actually connect to one another, be in harmony with one another. And I think that gets the idea of essence of capturing what the nodes are, because then you can actually describe the relationships between those parts. Otherwise, you couldn't. So that's my takeaway. Steve, how do you feel? What are you taking away from today?
Well, it's so funny because I've talked about 1,080 degrees. I mean, Richard, you were there 2 years ago, I think, or a year and a half ago, where we talked about that, how sure and confident I was about it. And tonight it was like crystal clear. And at least the invitation to see that together with convex. I'm not sure how convincing I would be to another person to explain it. I like the example. This is where Amy, as Joe mentioned, and I commented earlier, how she brings everything down, like mentioning Eddington, taking Bucky's very complex definition of synergetics and then showing Eddington's there in 8 words. I mean, that really showed to me how Amy really understands this and is doing a really good job communicating. I'm still blown away. I hope that Anne, I wish that I hope she gets to hear this recording, but this whole idea of, I'm nervous about the convex element, being able to explain that, but I love the way the next paragraph she explains how you have the sofa in your living room, and you can look at the sofa in terms of the sofa as a system, but the sofa is in the living room. You can examine that, then you have 2, and then you can go from the living room to the house, and you can go from the house to the community, and it's just system inside a system. And that's profound. So I just wonder when we're going to pull our heads out as human beings, come out of our 2-dimensional reality and start being able to look at problems, look at systems, the systems of things, and stop taking pills to solve symptoms and start looking at holistic solutions to situations, which I think is about to start in America. If you weren't here, Richard, but we talked about the political scene and how Elon Musk and RFK Jr. are supposedly siding with Trump. We'll see if Trump actually takes on a team and does anything. But if we can do anything to return our soil to its health and start looking at the science of things and not buying into the pharmaceutical propaganda, America being one of only 2 companies that allows pharmaceuticals to advertise on television. And we're one of the 6 countries on the planet. Maybe there'll be some change, you know? So I just love Amy and what she's doing here. And I love the epiphanies. I also threw all 3 of my graphics in. I want to put them here on the chart here. I'm going to share screen to do that. All 3 of my graphics in. First is, this is the graphic that explains the positive intention or the state of bliss, and then suddenly having an initial sensitizing event, and then a symptom producing event, then a symptom intensifying event, which we now create habits based on the idea of seeking and avoiding, right? Which is all done for survival. The next slide that goes along in my presentation is showing how these decisions, there's a whole process I call pi times CBR&R, where a person can actually take pi, which is the initial state of bliss or assumed, gosh, I don't remember positive intention, and then take the thought, put it together with the imagination, put it together with the memory, give it energy, and then the central nervous system responds with the behavior. I created this myself, and then R&R is the results in relationships. So I created this whole system in hypnotherapy and psychoanalysis of analyzing the seeking, avoiding, and looking at the top 5 events in a person's life and noticing that they're not necessarily sequential. That sometimes an event I had last month can be my number 1 motivating event, where an event I had when I was 5 years old might be number 2. And then the third slide is this universe solar system of slides, where all these belief systems start interrelating and things get really complicated in how to resolve them. I've dropped all 3 of those slides in the chat. They won't survive the chat. Because the chat doesn't take graphics. So I will do what I can to put those 3 slides in the invitation for next week so that they can be looked at this week. What I wish I could do is put my epiphany about concave, convex, and my story about Govinda and Siddhartha to picture the systematic way of looking at the enlightened way of looking at the universe. I'm just grateful for you guys. Richard, thrilled you showed up. You were able to show up. So delighted for that on your holiday. And how soon is midnight for you? Oop, you're on mute. It's midnight for Joe right now. It's 10 o'clock for me. When's it midnight for you? 5 hours. Okay, cool beans. Well, blessings to you. Safe travels to you and your wife. And thanks for taking the time to drop in. You added a lot to the call. You always do. Joe, same to you, my friend. Staying up late and making your contributions.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. So
Cool beans.
yeah, appreciate it. Have a
Thanks
good
to
safe
everybody.
trip home, Richard.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.